Okay, welcome everybody. Good to see you as always. Welcome to today's Culture Chat, What's in a Name? So a couple of announcements before we get started. We have some dates solidified in the calendar for our upcoming Crossing Cultures with Competence. As I mentioned last week, we had, or our last Culture Chat, I should say, rather, we just completed an online version. So here we have 2 in-person trainings, and then our next one is in December online. We also have Vanessa's It's Not What You Say, It's How You Say It webinar, which is quite popular. So we added these 2 dates at the bottom. If you're interested in any of these workshops, please let us know and we'll get you more information. As we were updating the slides, we noticed that we have July 26th, and then we are off for the month of August. But of course, we'll resume that first Wednesday back in September, and we'll send you reminders. So it gives us a bit of time as a team to meet, start planning future culture chats, and reflect on the data that we've gathered from you in the chat box and over the year. So we look forward to that, and we hope you guys enjoy your August as well. And of course, as always, please do share your culture chat topics of interest. If you have a topic that you feel particularly comfortable with and that you would like to share your knowledge with the group, we welcome that as well. Fast approaching is the iTech deadline. So this is the Intercultural Training Expertise Certification. That's August 1st. We've had quite a few requests for a Q&A or information session. So we put one in the diary in the planner for July 20th, and you can see the various times. And also, I believe Singapore, it is 11 p.m. I know we had a email about that as well. So there you go. If you want more information, do get in contact. Of course, that's what we're here for. So before I share that, I have the privilege today to introduce to you a longtime Culture Chat member, and she has presented for us and with us before. So I'm pleased to welcome Tamara Makoni. She is an inclusion and cultural specialist and a third culture kid, one of the popular topics that we talk about here. She's been brought up across 3 continents, and currently she's living in Brussels, Belgium. Her business, you may have seen this online through LinkedIn postings, is Kaziri Consulting. So with her business, she's focused on helping leaders build inclusive cultures in order to empower diverse teams as well as fuel innovation. So she positions cross-cultural intelligence as a key tool to facilitate this type of learning, and her particular interest and understanding is in topical issues with cross-cultural and a DEI lens. Who she works with is multinational companies across all sorts of industry sectors, and also does some work with NGOs in Europe. So it's my pleasure to welcome Tamara as today's Culture Chat presenter. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can lead us in this interesting topic.
Let me take myself off mute. This is a good first starting place. So lovely to be here with you, and really looking forward to spending the next hour together discussing this topic and hearing about your naming stories, your thoughts about naming conventions in different cultures, etc. I'm really happy to, again, have the privilege of presenting to Culture Chat community and discuss this topic. So I'm going to turn on the share my screen, and then get started. So please bear with me for a moment while I set up things on my side. Lovely. Okay, so I can still see you all there. Great. So just flashing up this very briefly, because of course Tasha read out the introduction, but just so you can see the fun fact that I'd like to share with you all today. The fact that I really enjoy fries. I live here in Belgium, so it is an institution to enjoy eating the fries here. And note the Belgian in brackets. I'll talk about that in a moment. And I hate chocolate. So that's, the not so great side of living in Belgium, when, as you're probably aware, Belgium is famous for its chocolates, and it's very much an institution of sharing chocolates together, things like that. But yeah, I'm very happy to receive them, then pass them on rather than eating them myself. So what is in a name? You might recognize this quote from Romeo and Juliet by Shakespeare, and it's Juliet speaking, musing about the fact that she's just fallen in love with Romeo at first sight. They've shared a special moment, and she's found out about his lineage now, which family he's from, and wondering, how can we be together? But he is still the same person. Just because he has the name Montague doesn't mean that he is any different, and I could still, we can still be together. And if he were Capulet or had a different surname, then there'll be no issue and he'll be the same person. So in today's talk, I'm not going to be disputing this philosophy and disputing Shakespeare, but I am going to be talking about the fact that just because this might be true, it might be just as sweet called something differently, it doesn't mean that names are devoid of significance. And this is what we'll be looking into today, looking at a few different cultures and examples of naming conventions and what they mean. And the fact that our names often carry great meaning and can be a gateway to understanding different cultures. So I'll be sharing some stories about that from my own name and others as we go through. And this actually, as Tasha mentioned in the introduction, I like to look at topical things that come up. And this one is not really related to something I read in the media, for instance, but it's just something that I've been doing for a while in my own work. As an icebreaker, to create a sense of safe space, we're all friends, get people laughing and sharing, I like to play the game of sharing the story behind your name. So I ask people, go around the room, tell us why you are called what you are called. And I find that it often brings up a number of funny stories. You get people laughing, sharing, learning about a side to each other and their family history that probably wasn't evident before. And bringing this back to that previous slide, talking about the word in brackets, about Belgian fries, then that is a little story about a name I'd like to share, a little known fact about Belgium, the fact that what we call French fries are actually Belgian fries. And the story behind that is that during the First World War, American soldiers came into contact with French-speaking soldiers who were eating these frites, or the fried piece of potato, fries. And because of the language, speaking French, then they said, French fries, and that name spread. But in fact, they were speaking with Belgian soldiers who were speaking French, because of course, French is one of the three national languages here in Belgium. So a little story there about names again. So I'd like actually to start this off by playing this icebreaker game and ask two people to bring themselves off of mute and share the story behind their names for us all. Why are you called what you are called? So please go ahead.
Yes, so my name actually is never being used in the United States because it comes in the middle of my name. I have a first name, middle name, and last name. Middle name is my name, but in this country, when I got, they changed that into the first initial only. So I start using my first name, which is not really my name, which is my lineage, Syed. Syed means descendant of Muhammad. It's not my name, but that's what's being used in this country because I wanted to follow the culture. I wanted to be considered assimilated. So I said, okay, they call me by my first name, I'll use the first one. First, my teachers begin to say Sid instead of Syed because Syed was too hard to pronounce. I said, okay, I'll use Sid because Sid is easier for them. Then when I started working for ExxonMobil, names were very complicated. I have to pronounce them like Shelkowski, Lotecki. I said, if I can have to pronounce Shelkowski and Lotecki, they can pronounce a four-letter word Syed. So I moved to Syed.
Thanks for sharing, Syed. Really interesting to hear your name story. Would one other person like to share as well? Why they're called what they are called?
I can just share one thing. I mean, this is Ricardo. Hi, everyone. One of the things is not why my name is called, but I'm glad that something changed. In Mexico, in the old days, you used to get the name of the patron saint. So I was born on Epiphany. So therefore, my name would have been Epifanio. I'm so glad they changed that because I don't like that name at all. And so that's one of the things that in the traditional happy birthday song in Spanish, they say, hoy por ser día de tu santo, for today being your, instead of saying birthday, we say the day of your saint. That's because you used to get the name of the patron saint of that particular day. So that's just something that I'm glad that they changed the tradition and that we didn't have to get the name of the day that we were born.
Well, thank you for sharing. For sure, really interesting to hear the stories. And as you can already see, starting to understand elements of different cultures through how we get our names or how we didn't get certain names. always good to, I find, start this off and just get people sharing and understanding more about different cultures and each other in the room. And this is a book that some of you may be familiar with, The Namesake by Jhumpa Lahiri. And it shows a story about a name, as the name suggests. And it really shows that the names we get generally aren't accidental. It's, I'd say, a very, very good book, but I'm bringing up because of how one of the central characters, Gogol, got his name. So according to his family tradition, then the grandparents were meant to choose the name. But unfortunately, the letter got lost in the post from India to the United States. And so the parents were in the hospital after the baby's birth, and there was no name for the child. Nothing had been decided because they were waiting for the letter. And the staff of the hospital would not let the family leave without the baby having a name that had been registered. So the name Gogol was given, in reference to the author Nikolai Gogol, who was the favorite author of the baby's father. So that is how he got a rather unconventional name. And that sort of led to a series of events through his life that are followed within this novel. So instances that's showing that it's rarely accidental how we get our names, and they often carry great significance. So now let's look at some specific cultures and see how that comes into pass. So the first one we'll look at is the Shona culture, which is actually my family's culture, based in Zimbabwe, and looking at the fact that names generally carry deep significance. For instance, they can reference specific family events. And the first story I'd like to share around this is the name Chido, which is a Shona word meaning gift, and it's a very popular name in Shona culture. And it's actually the name of one of my cousins. And she got this name because at the time, the specific family event was her parents were going through a divorce very soon after she was born. I understand it was in the first week, really, of her birth. It was really the time when the parents were splitting up. A lot was going on in the family. And so people were quite distracted, dealing with what was going on day to day. And eventually my grandfather brought everyone together and said, we need to remember that we've just had a birth in the family. This is a gift. Therefore, we should all be mindful of this and not forget about that with everything else going on. And so they named my cousin Chido, or gift, to remember that and bring that about. And there are many other examples of people in Shona culture who have similar names with significance relating to family circumstances and events. And this is another one that is, thinking of one specific story, it's a name that means misfortune, but it is a common name that people have in the country around Zimbabwe. And so thinking about circumstances, this particular story is from a person whose parents were going through some very tough times financially and in other situations at the time that this child was born. And so they named their child Misfortune, or Namo in Shona, in order to kind of commemorate the situation that he was born within and take that through, so that they kind of, even though they hoped that this would pass, they would never forget this period within the family's history. And there are many names like this that connect to values, hopes, aspirations for the child, and even fears, and rhetorical questions are used, linking back to things going on in the family, maybe as a warning to somebody, as thinking back to an event that happened connected to their ancestors. There are lots of names that carry big importance and meanings. And here is one, for example, one of the name that is in use, that is My Day, which means what did you want? And so I don't know the exact story behind this, but you can imagine that there was a message that was being given to somebody in the family, or even perhaps to somebody in their ancestors, in the lineage, asking a question, or perhaps referring back to an event that had happened, and this baby was born. They decided to commemorate that, or somehow send a signal in some way and share a message through naming this child. So you can see that in some ways, it's less about the circumstances of the child themselves, and it's more about the family, the wider context of what is going on, and bringing that child into the context of the family. And as mentioned, I'm talking about the ancestors quite often. And this is, I'd say, definitely something that is very alive in Shona culture, even today. Thinking about the ancestors, yes, they have passed on, but they still have a place in the culture, in the home to an extent. And there are even some stories around children linked to the ancestors. For instance, if a baby cries continuously and nothing seems to appease the baby, then people say that it is one of the ancestors speaking through the child, and the child should be named for that person. So work needs to be done to investigate, find out which ancestor it is, and then give them a name that is relevant. And so that name could be giving them the same name as that ancestor, but more commonly, it's linking to perhaps certain aspect of the ancestor's personality, or maybe even going into something about their circumstances when they were alive, maybe their virtues, a specific incident in their life, something like that, which is how you might get names like Chido, Namo, My Day, linking back to previous historical events within the family setting. And there is a little quirk, I would say, that comes in Zimbabwe. If you go there today and encounter Shona people, you'll notice that there are many people with names like this in the Shona language. There are also many with English names, but they might not be the English names that you might expect in some circumstances. These, you can see on screen now, are some examples of common names in English that are used in Shona culture. So things like God knows, take more. I'd say that suffix of more is very popular. Give more, take more, love more, kiss more is even a name I've encountered, admire, polite. And so it's very similar significance thinking about what we talked about for the names like Namo, Maide, linking back to family circumstances, just using those same words that might be used, but in English rather than in Shona. It's coming up with things like that. But the thing to mention is when we see the names in Shona, Chilo, Namo, Maide, it's very current in the sense that when the Shona language is being spoken, then Namo might come up just when somebody's saying, oh, I've had a bad day or something bad has happened. It's not that these names are hidden or veiled in any way. These are words that live currently in the Shona language on a day-to-day basis, as well as being names at the same time. Another culture to look at, this time we're going to Ghana and looking at the Ashanti culture. And the Ashanti people are a subgroup of the Akan people, mainly found within Ghana, but other places in Western Africa as well. And a common naming convention here is looking at birthdays, the day on which people were born, kind of like what Ricardo was saying about saints' days and conventions around that, looking at the days on which people were born and giving names to links to that, as well as to birth order within the family. So here are some examples. You can see for each day of the week, there are names that are commonly used for both genders to bring out the personality. And in the Ashanti culture, then the day that somebody is born on roughly has the same meaning as a zodiac sign. So it's really thinking about the person's soul and the character, and that's why the name is used to bring out that. And here are some examples of notable people where we can see this naming convention in their names. So Kwame Nkrumah, we know that he was born on a Saturday. He was the first president of Ghana post-independence. Kofi Annan, the former UN Secretary General, born on a Friday. And Ama Ata Addo, who was a politician and poet, also born on a Saturday, along with Kwame Nkrumah. Yeah, I say that, but probably not on the same day, not twins, but born on a Saturday, the same as Kwame Nkrumah. You can see those names coming through, and that's still very much alive in the culture today. You might be wondering, what if you have siblings in the same family who are both born on the same day? So that is when birth order starts to come in. And you can see here that depending on the order you fall within the family, there are certain names that are added to the first name, the day name, in order to give the full name and really signify your place within the family and prevent any confusion. And then there are also certain conventions around if you are a twin, because then what do? They get the same name. In that case, then the word Ata is given. And we can see from two of the people mentioned previously, Ama Ata Addo and Kofi Annan, he's a twin as well. Both of them have Ata in their names, slightly different spellings, signifying that they are twins. And if you are born after a twin, then the name Tawia is often used, again, to show the birth order in that way. So some examples here to share about specific cultures and how the names come about, the relevance that they show, and links to family history, personality, or ways to understand the child themselves, looking at here. But now I want to take us out of individual cultures and start looking at trends that we can see across cultures, because during the research, there were certain things which came out around this. And one trend that I really see across cultures is using names, repeating names. Hence, I've got that quote there about imitation being the sincerest form of flattery. So I'd like us to look together at a few different ways in which this comes about. We can see it. The first is looking at aspirational names. So as you can see there, names which reflect a community's hopes, parental hopes, and expectations for the child. And so we can think of perhaps religious names or biblical names in this. Naming a child Ruth, for instance, daughter Ruth, hoping that she comes to embody the values that the biblical character symbolizes, and hoping that that will form part of who she is. Also, my name, Tamara, I believe falls into this category. My name is Tamara because my mother is a great admirer of Russian culture, particularly Russian ballet. And so she knew about Tamara Karstavina, a famous prima ballerina. And so she decided that she would name me Tamara, my sister Tatiana, after these famous ballerinas, partly because she wanted to do ballet when she was younger, didn't have the chance. So it was very important for her that her daughter should do ballet and should kind of embody this ballet lifestyle in a sense. So yes, I did ballet my entire childhood. It was non-negotiable, but thankfully I enjoyed it. And we had these Russian names. And it was very clear to us that had we ever had a brother, his name would have been either Vladimir or Nikolai. My mother was very clear about the Russian theme. So I think this falls into that aspirational category. The second one to think about is what I've termed as keeping it in the family. We can see in some cultures that it's fairly common to have senior, junior, person who's the second, the third, the fourth, etc., sharing the same name through different generations as a way of continuing family legacy. And there's even one British family I know, for instance, where they have a repeated pattern where somebody is called Andrew, his son is Charles, his son is Andrew, his son is Charles. Like that name is continued for, I believe, at least a century or so, that naming convention going through the family and just bringing that sense of legacy and continuity. So definitely that is one trend that we see in many different cultures. And in my own family as well, then in early generations, not so much now, but in early generations, it was quite common to repeat names in a sense. Like my mother is Pauline, and she is named after her own aunt Pauline. I think it's less an homage to my great aunt Pauline's character, but it's more about this was a name that was used, and there are certain names that are sort of in the bucket for the family to use. And so, okay, this one is available now, let's pass it on to somebody else. There are a number of names like that that have kind of been recycled through generations. But now in my generation, then like my cousins, my sister and I, we're seeing more of the aspirational names coming through, fewer family names from that bucket, and also more popular naming conventions coming through, which is the third trend that we'll look at. So pop culture. This definitely has a bearing on names. I believe in many cultures, we can see that children can be named according to things that are very in vogue at the moment. Perhaps famous singers. Like I remember speaking to somebody in a workshop who said that Joe Le Taxi by Vanessa Paradis was playing on the way that on the drive to the hospital that her parents took before she was born. And so she is called Vanessa. Things like that. And other people who might be named after a famous actor, actress, singers, characters from films. In France, for instance, then in the 1990s, the name Kevin was very popular as an homage to the character from Home Alone, Kevin Costner, and Kevin Keegan, who was a football player in the UK at the time. And so there's a whole generation where there are many, many Kevins you can see in France. Also in 2019, a survey in the UK showed that some of the names that have had the biggest jump in popularity in recent years are Ariana, after Ariana Grande, Jesse from the character in Breaking Bad, Dexter, a serial killer from TV, Hermione from Harry Potter, and Zendaya, the actor. So we can see that this is definitely something across cultures where people see, perhaps aspirational as well, but people see figures and decide to name their children after them. Maybe they just like the name, maybe it's aspirational, maybe it's a mix of things. And so now I'd like us to do a small quiz together. I've got a poll prepared because one thing that also we see within pop culture is naming children creative names, let's put it that way. And this is something that many celebrities do, and we're starting to see that people are doing it as well. People who aren't very notable celebrities also are starting to do that and seeing some very creative names come in and hit the top 500 list in different countries, for instance. So I'm going to launch a poll quickly to get your thoughts. I think I'll stop sharing briefly. How do I? There we go. I'll stop sharing and launch the poll to hear your thoughts. So which of these is not a celebrity baby name? Place your votes. Okay, opinions pretty spread. We have early dominance for one name, but opinions pretty spread so far. Interesting. Okay, a few more people left to vote. And then I'll share the results. Okay, so most people have voted, so I'll share the results now. So pilot inspector, as you can see, was the most popular name. And I'm hoping that we can, Wu-Tang is for the children, love that. There's reference to the RZA. And so I'm hoping that we can keep that up on screen while I reshare my slides. So we can have that for reference. Okay. So these were the different options that were available, the 5 ones there. The correct answer is currency with a K. That is not a celebrity baby name. So the first one, which I won't try to pronounce, is actually the child of Elon Musk and Grimes. The second one, RZA, I think is how you pronounce it, is Rihanna and A$AP Rocky. Pilot inspector with a lovely K is Jason Lee and Beth Riesgraf. Currency is not a celebrity baby name, and Radix is Cameron Diaz and Benji Madden. You can see lots of creative ones coming up then, and then other ones which people are bringing up, spellings like of words that might not have really been conventional as names before, starting to use those, changing the spellings, adding a K, things like that. Seeing a lot of creativity, perhaps in an homage to celebrity culture. And the final thing to look at for now is, now that we've looked at trends we see across cultures, is something that is, I'd say, cross-cultural in nature. A dilemma that living here in very multicultural Brussels is something that many of my friends have faced as they are having children. They are in cross-cultural relationships, and now, beyond simply thinking about meaning, ooh, where's my thing gone? There we go. So meaning is very important, but thinking about pronounceability and relevance in multiple different cultures. You can see in the table here 3 examples of couples that I know, and looking at the nationalities of the partners in the couple. And so it's very important, all of them were saying, very important as considerations, that all of their relatives should be able to pronounce the name, that it also shouldn't mean anything negative in any language or any of these cultures within any of the nations, things like that. So different considerations coming through on a cross-cultural level. Definitely spotting there. Okay. So now, time to go into breakout rooms and have a discussion. Hello. Hi, Marianne.
Hello.
Oh, did you have a question? Let me go back.
No.
Oh, but Syed, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I wanted to share, you were talking about cross-cultural. So I was in a cross-cultural marriage coming from Pakistan, married a woman from Akron, Ohio, German British heritage, American for several centuries. And we had the issue. I'm coming from a Muslim Pakistani culture, and the names there were very different than the American names. However, we debated and fought and argued, and we came up with biblical names for my son. So Daniel, but in Pakistan it's called Daniel. So my parents said Daniel, my relatives in Pakistan call him Daniel, which is a common name there, but in English it's Daniel. So it's the same name, but just pronounced differently, same spelling. For Sophia, I wanted to give a name Natasha, which she said, no, this is Russian. We cannot have our child named Russian. So we came up with a name called Sophia. In Pakistan, it's Sophia, but here is Sophia. But I wanted to have an F, but she argued it has to be PH.
A great example, as you see, as the discussions that take place in cross-cultural relationships and cross-cultural families, making sure that the name works on multiple different levels.
Yes.
Great, thank you for sharing. So now time to go into the breakout rooms. And of course, the first agenda point is to share the story behind your name. It'll be great to hear from all of us why we are called what we are called in our different groups and share those stories. And then asking you to think about what are some dominant naming conventions in the culture or cultures where you live? What have you come across? Perhaps things that have been mentioned before in the presentation today, perhaps other things you've found about. It'll be lovely to learn from you other conventions that you are aware of. And also wondering if there are any links you can see between naming conventions and other features of that culture. And I'll refer back to the Shona culture that I mentioned earlier in Zimbabwe. It's a very collectivist culture. Respect for elders and ancestors is very paramount. And as I mentioned, even when people have passed on, they're still felt to an extent to still be part of the community, pay reference to them, we bring them in terms of naming children, etc., etc. And so it's no wonder that there are links to this to the naming conventions that still live on today, bringing in elements of key family history, naming them for particular ancestors, scenarios throughout their lives, things like that, because it's really about the family rather than looking at an individual level, pardon me, for naming a child. So those are 3 things for us to think about, and I'd like to invite you now to go into the breakout groups, and I'd love to hear your thoughts after the discussion.
This meeting is being recorded.
Perfect, thank you, Tasha. So it was really interesting being in one of the breakout groups and hearing stories, but the stories behind people's names, but also hearing about different naming conventions in different cultures and some stories behind that and links between the naming conventions and other aspects of those cultures. So I'd like to just open the floor now and ask people to share things that perhaps are from their own culture or cultures, things that were shared in the group that would be good to share with the wider group of us today. Please, the floor is yours.
Or maybe I can just share what was spoken in our group. Is that okay?
Please go ahead.
Okay, I'm just not opening the camera because I'm walking. But so something that I found very interesting is that kind of need to find a name that everybody could pronounce. Like it seemed to be something that is very important for everybody, like to have a name that is easily pronounced, and something that was said in our group is so important. It's like when somebody actually finds the right pronunciation and the right spelling, you actually feel seen. And I think that's super important. It's like that need of recognition and yeah, not being just like a person that it doesn't matter how I write your name, like I don't know, there is a part of your identity that goes with that name. And how many of us just changed it. I was sharing how I changed my own name because people will not kind of see me through that name. Like I have an African name. I'm called Kalimba. And people will not expect a blondie, white-skinned girl named Kalimba Kinti, which are 2 African names. And so I have a first name and a middle name that are African. So it was like, okay, so how can I make it easy for everybody to get the right spelling, to find the right match with my face? And that's how I changed to Karina, because it really had to stay into the sounds that I was used to, like Kalimba and Karina, not too far. They both spell with a K. But it is true that, especially, so we had some Asian in the group, and this is something that happens to them a lot. Like they really have to find a way to translate their names that the pronunciation stays close enough to what they used to, but that is easily pronounced by maybe Western cultures or Europeans. Or so this was something that I found very important. And yeah, I don't know if somebody else from the group wants to share something else.
Well,
So,
I'm not.
oh, go on.
I just wanted to say that I wasn't part of that initial group, but that really resonated with me because for the longest time I would just tell people that my name was Ryan or Ray, but my actual name is Rayan. And you know, it wasn't until a few years ago that I felt comfortable enough to say that that is my actual name. And you are 100% correct. It's interesting once somebody can say it almost perfectly and they put that extra effort, it makes you feel seen.
I was reading something recently talking about how we tend to very often like freely share our names. I'll just put it into the Zoom. You can all see my name's Tamara Makoni, etc. But it is very closely linked to our identities and very, very personal as well. So it's interesting to see that. So definitely understanding what you're saying about that link of wanting to have it pronounced in the right way, treated with respect in a way, for sure. Ricardo, I saw your hand was up.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a little bit kind of building on the same concept. I had the opportunity to be with Renata, Annette, and Marianne. And one of the things that came up too is, I guess, the awareness of how we are intercultural practitioners, because we put always the element of empathy. And sometimes people are very judgmental in terms of, no, you should pronounce the name a certain way. And well, we know it's difficult. People have different accents. Sometimes you can't roll the R's. Sometimes you can't do the nasal sounds, et cetera, et cetera. So we talked a little bit about the perspective of some people get offended, some people won't. But that is the element of empathy in terms of, if you're very individualistic, because Renata was saying, well, I don't understand why in the States people get so offended. And I know that the Gallup agency did a research on this, and they say that 15% of people have expressed that they don't like the name they're being called by. And that is not just even mispronunciation. It can be that you call a Robert Bob, and they don't like that. So I just think it's a great opportunity for all of us to build empathy, understand, make an effort if it's important for the other person. But at the same time, we cannot label and correct people and say, you should do this, you should do that. Because even in Hispanic culture, we normally don't say mi nombre es, which will be the literal translation for my name is. We say me llamo, which literally is translated, I call myself. So basically by saying I call myself, this is the name that I like to be called by. And I was sharing with the group that all my life living in Mexico, nobody ever called me Ricardo. I was always Rich, Richie, Ricky. I probably had like 20 different names that I was called by. And it wasn't until I moved to the States that people actually were calling me Ricardo. And I couldn't even respond to that name because I didn't identify with that name. So we just, I mean, there was a lot of conversation, but I thought it was very interesting because it came also the aspect of individualism and collectivism, that in collectivistic, well, we don't want to create feuds or disagreement or discussion. And individualistic, oh no, I need to stand my ground and say exactly what I think is important. Things like that.
Thanks for sharing. Very interesting insights. Thanks for that. And
It's
Pallavi, I see your hand
Yeah.
is also up.
Thank you. I just wanted to come in. It's just a personal example. And I realize as interculturalists and world travelers, we realize the more we come across different cultures, we realize what our name could mean in that culture. And I have a funny story. So I was once training a Greek gentleman, and he told me that my name in Greek means crazy lady. And I'm like, okay, so going forward, every time, I wish my parents knew about it when they named me, but going forward, I use it as an icebreaker. If I know somebody's from Greece, I'll just like, you know what my name means, right? And they'll be like, oh yeah, I don't think I'm going to forget that. So that's an icebreaker. But ever since I moved to Saudi Arabia, I got to know that in Arabic, there's the pronunciation of P doesn't exist. It's B. So they replaced P with B in everything. For example, like it's never parking, it's barking. It's like, where do I bark, for example, you know, but which means my name ends up being Balavi. And Balavi means big trouble, like the biggest trouble or hurdle you could have. And plural, Bala is one hurdle and Balavi is. So every time, even the immigration officers, they would see my comma, my passport, and go like, you know what your name means in Arabic, right? And I'd be like, I know, it's big trouble. So it's another icebreaker, I suppose, but yeah, I'm pretty sure we've come across these incidences as well, but I think it's really funny.
So thanks for sharing. Seeing a lot of reactions, people on camera, but also like the little icons coming up, the laugh emojis. So thanks for sharing. I think looking at the time, perhaps we have time for one more person to share, unless Tasha, there was anything you wanted to wrap up at the end of the session with?
No, just before we end, those of you that are in the intercultural circle, if you want to stay on afterwards and continue the conversation with Tamara and some of us, that would be great. Otherwise, yes, you can close us out with the last comment.
Thank you. So yeah, we have time for one last comment, or one last remark from the breakout groups. Who would like to share? And perhaps share the reflections from the breakout room, or just share the story behind your name.
I can just answer to what was in the chat regarding my name. Yeah, I know there was an artist that was called Kalimba in Mexico. But that's the thing, like in Africa, actually, Kalimba can be given to people, but it has to be a male. So no matter where I go, I just don't fit what is expected. Like I'm a woman, white and blonde, and I have a male African name. So yeah, this is something that is also kind of funny, because I had that when I had a nurse that came to help me home that was African. And when she saw the woman she was coming to help, and I was called Kalimba, she was like, I'm confused. I'm going to help a woman. And she's got an African male name. And then she saw me and said, oh, and you're blonde and white? Oh, okay. Okay. That was not at all what I was expecting. So.
Well, I'm curious, Karina, just dipping into the story, thanks for sharing that, just to find out exactly where in Africa, or which culture within Africa the name comes from, if you're aware of that. I mean, there are many different cultures and languages in Africa, so just curious to find out exactly where.
I haven't got actually as deep as that, because I actually have two of them, and Kinti seems to be also a family name from an African tribe. So I have two names that are fully African, but I'm not more aware than what we were discussing. Like, I know it's African. I've been given those comments by African people. I never kind of digged into what kind of culture, and I know it's just an African instrument of music. So many of you are maybe familiar with it. It's a little box with little strings, with little metallic little bars. And it's quite soft. You can find kalimba music on YouTube a lot. And that's as far as I know. I never got into the name deeper. And I think part of it is because of all the rejection I got from it and because of wearing it. So I think to me it was like, you know what, just get rid of it and find something easier that will get you less trouble, precisely coming back to Pallavi's comment.
Thanks for sharing it. It definitely makes me think about the instrument marimba. You mentioned the musical part. There is something in Southern Africa called the marimba, which is described, and the words are very similar. So I'm wondering if maybe Swahili or but language a bit further up north from Southern Africa, but interesting to know.
It could be. I'm not sure. But marimba is a big percussion one, and kalimba is a smaller one. But it could be. You may be right. I'm going to have to look into it for the next time I have that question.
We look forward to hearing your insights. And thank you all for everyone who's joined. Really interesting to share this information with you, to hear your stories, your reflections as well. Always a joy.
Thank you, everybody. We'll see you in 2 weeks' time for our last culture chat until September. So we hope you can join us. Until then, take care and we'll see you soon.